So this is going to be kind of an unorthodox video. We have completed, as far as I know, basically everything there is to see in Slouching Towards Bedlam, but I had such a hard time kind of making sense of the plot when I first, like on yesterday's episode, that I figured I would go ahead and just record. I'd give myself some time to try to work through what it all means, and then give a kind of final report on my kind of analysis in the game. So I guess the main question with the game, with any kind of game of this kind, is what is the theme of the game? What is it trying to say? And so if we look at the structure of this game, I really took kind of inspiration in how I thought it's structured from the kind of standard walkthrough of the game going around, which divides it into three parts. You've got the first part where you as the player learn who you are as Dr. Thomas Xavier, kind of what's going on. There's the second part where you learn what the deal with Cleve Anderson is, and kind of learn the secret. And the third is the stage where you essentially take the steps to pick whichever ending you want. And it's really that third ending where you only really have any autonomy as a player. And that's kind of where that's where you get to choose, interact with the themes of the story. That's where you get to choose where it goes. And so it's that choice of whether or not to release logos that is kind of the driving question behind the game. And so understanding the theme of the game really comes down to understanding what logos is meant to represent. Now, a very kind of surface reading of the game, surface level reading, sees logos as a kind of Lovecraftian entity, either being or posing as the Abrahamic god, and it being just kind of a Lovecraftian story in that sense. I don't feel like that's really... that might be kind of accurate in just a literal sense, but I don't think it's really too informative. Because the main thing is that... So that's one of the endings, right? Ending B is one where you do nothing, logo spreads. I feel like that is kind of just the default ending. I feel like that one's kind of best explained just in terms of game mechanics. It's the ending where you don't do anything or fail to execute any ideas in time. And so it's just describing what the default state is, just kind of what the natural cause, the causal chain of the situation that the game is in at that point. What would naturally happen. So putting that aside, the other three endings, right? You've got the one where you kill everyone else who knows about logos, and then there's one where you successfully kill yourself. There's one where you don't kill yourself. There's a third ending where you use the logos time magic to go to the very start of the game and kill yourself immediately. And all three of those, provided you've seen all the environments, provided you've looked at everything, all three of those are pretty straightforward to execute. It's the one extra ending where you go out of your way to spread logos as far as you can using the transceiver. And it's interesting because all of the game's structure, both in terms of the game's design and the narrative structure, point to that being the good ending, which definitely goes in the face of seeing logos as this evil Lovecraftian thing. First off, it's the only ending which has actual puzzles locking it. All the other endings you can get just kind of by mucking about, doing what the obvious thing to do would be. And it's also the only ending that doesn't result in all the other endings, the three non-default endings where you lock away logos all involve like all involve like spree killing, and they all end with you either killing yourself or being brutally maimed and essentially tortured in the asylum. None of them, they're all posed as basically unequivocally bad things to happen, whereas the ending where you go out of your way to spread logos is like, I wouldn't say it's good, but the game goes out of its way not to explicitly state like the world where everyone has logos as a good or bad thing. And so I think what that really tells you is that we need to like know what logos is meant to represent before we can like make any judgments in that sense. And so the theme of the game is like, is it right to spread in society and then whatever logos is to represent? So the question here we really have to understand the game is, what does logos represent? Now, logos is, over the course of the game, tied to a few different motifs. There's this, first off, it's introduced as like meta-knowledge, knowledge of the game's mechanics, and like the being in a work of fiction, kind of, maybe not that far, but knowledge of the game's mechanics, being able to interact with the parser. It's also presented as, it's presented through the lens of mental illness, often manifesting in forms similar to paranoid schizophrenia, as they want to show it. It also has all sorts of, very religious and occultic symbolism about it. It's also often talked of, like, in terms of spreading, like, a disease. It has a lot of disease imagery around it, and so the fact that it has all these symbols kind of means that it can't really be representing any one of them, because if we take it to be, like, say, mental illness, well, then the meta-knowledge, knowledge of the game's parser, doesn't really make sense, and, like, all the religious imagery doesn't fully make sense. And the similar kind of logic goes if you say it's any one of those. So we kind of need to find some symbol that logos can represent that kind of encapsulates at least elements of all of them. And the only real idea I could think of that would make sense for logos to be would just be like an abstraction of knowledge in and of itself, in a very generic context. Because like I said, the game makes great pains not to portray the spreading of logos as a good or bad thing. We are supposed to figure that out for ourselves. And so it's not necessarily knowledge. It can't really be knowledge in terms of like knowledge of like thing of like in like a sciencey way in terms of like progress, and it can't be like really pin it down to be harmful knowledge either. Like, what are the modern cringe internet terms for it, like info hazards or whatever. It's just, it's knowledge in a very abstract setting, and the question is then to be kind of, is the spreading of knowledge good if you don't know maybe what the consequences are? And so, ostensibly then, the kind of posing of that mess, like, how the ending is meant to be posed then is, like, a question of, like, like you're supposed to enact how you feel about that theme, as is often the case with these multiple choice ending things. But I think that itself is a little bit of a surface level rating, because if you keep in mind, right, Cleve stated that he tried all sorts of things using the multiple endings and like using like all the text parser save mechanics. And the way it's structured, I feel like seeing all of the endings, like the game kind of expects you to see all of the endings. Like if you look at the text it gives you at the end, it explicitly tells you to look for like more endings. And so I think, especially given that all the save mechanics in that are diegetic to the story, I think that it's not really a choice. The game kind of answers its own question because it expects you to see all of the endings, and so it's reasonable for the game's theme to expect all of the branches to be enacted. And I think because of that, and because of the fact that the information spreads that the knowledge of Logos spreads in almost all of the endings, I guess the kind of answer to that question and the theme that the game's trying to say is that the sort of that knowledge, it kind of doesn't matter what morality you assign to the knowledge, because it's going to it's in the nature of knowledge to spread whether or not it's a good thing and whether or not you want it to. Now, of course, that's my kind of attempt at explaining the game. I'm not an English major by any means, and also I've only had like one day to like think about this, so there's a lot more of the game to unpack. It says a lot about mental health too that I haven't fully like dig into. Like I still like need to figure out how, like, why can't you look into 1A from the visor? Like how there's a lot of discussions we had about how like how mentally ill are treated, and like the presence of the panopticon, how the alienists see that as a reasonable tool to spy on those with mental illness. I think there's stuff to be said about how the game like treats the mentally ill. I did try to snoop around for like other people's interpretations. I didn't see a whole lot. I did see one person though expressing concerns that the game wasn't always like didn't seem to them very sympathetic towards the mentally ill, how it was portrayed as kind of just like this kind of, very stereotypical schizophrenic depiction. And I think that's a reasonable like concern to have. I almost fully wouldn't agree with it. I feel like that's, by and large, that is mostly done to emphasize like the kind of cruelty with which the alienists treat their patients. I mean, some of the scene, like I'm thinking about it now as I'm talking, the last scene with Cleve in the diary is maybe like a bit much, but I feel like it's kind of, I don't know if it does fully excuse it, but it is kind of necessary just for the game to flow in the way it does. Anyways, my point being, this is still, I don't think, as deep of a rating as the game deserves, as the game warrants. But for over the course of one day, over the course of just thinking about it, that is about as much as I was able to put together. I think it's fairly reasonable. Like I said, I'm not an English major. I'd love to hear someone more learned than me chime in on this. It's also not a complete theory. There's several big parts of the game I'm still wondering about, especially like how the other two patients tie in and that kind of thing. But regardless, I feel like that's something. So one last thing I want to do before we call it quits is, we did briefly see before, if you go help, there is a hint section. I want to look through this here before we call it a day. So, in general, what on earth is going on here? So this is just telling you what like the steps of the game plot are. There's some stuff in Bethlehem Hospital. I won't read this just for the sake of pacing. I think this is just explaining how to interact with all the areas. Can I use the gallows to kill someone? I didn't try that. And before you can convince to put on the noose. I guess that's a hint. Smithfield, yeah. This is just explaining like how to solve various puzzles. Do you have a section on the logos? What does the game say about this? Okay, spoil me what the heck is going on. You're not who you think you are. People may refer to you as Dr. Thomas Xavier, but think about how you've been acting. Another thing I was wondering about is like how we as a player tie into Logos and Dr. Thomas Xavier. Because on the one hand, we are clearly not the person we are possessing, but at the same time, we can't be Logos because like we have the option to act against Logos. So there's something more going on with how us as the player character ties into the theme of the story. I haven't fully figured that out yet either. Okay, no memory case with everything, picking up anything that doesn't nail down. Not to mention moving about in time. Can people normally undo what's been done or save a moment to return at a later time? Here's something new. Does any of this sound familiar? Have you read file F68142? The original Xavier was infected by what infected Cleve. That's all. You receive this infection by listening to Cleve speak. That's through the panopticon. I have figured that much. Have you noticed anything strange when you meet a person for the first time? They have trouble understanding what you're saying. Is this a thing? You're speaking glossally, speaking in tongues, just like Clive. You infect every person you meet with part of the Logos, a thing that lives within your mind. Now you're faced with a choice. Do you stop the Logos? Is it worth the cost, or do you help it to grow? There is no cure for the infection. Death is the only release. Spraying it 1% at a time might help it to grow, but is there a more effective way to help to reach the masses? Yeah, so I feel like by and large that supports what I was saying. I don't, like I said, I'm still unsure of how exactly we as a player tie into Logos and Dr. Thomas Xavier, given that we can go against either of their wishes, but that is, I'll leave that as an exercise to the viewer. That's the math term for what it is there. The Logos suddenly got very active. What happened? This is just okay. It's outright. You have 25 turns. It's just explaining you have a timer before you end up with ending B. Oops. Yep, it tells you there are 5 endings. How do I win? Interesting question. How do you define winning anyways? Is the Logos evil? What is it really trying to do? Does it deserve to die? That being said, does humanity? Sorry, we can't answer this one. Alright, I having read all that, I think I stand by my analysis. I would, like I said, my theory, my reading, my literary interpretation is still pretty underbaked and kind of new in my mind, so I can't say I get it all, but I feel like this at least gives you enough of an in to the game to hopefully be able to interact with it on a deeper level, hopefully. In any sense, I guess I should give my thoughts on the game. This is a great game. It didn't go where I thought it would. I didn't know it would get meta. I really like how it handled the meta aspects, though. I feel like a lot of games that get meta kind of don't have enough of an actual story to carry that kind of meta thing going on. So I'm glad it's just that whole aspect's just like a subtle part of the story and not like doesn't consume the whole theming of the game. I'm also like that it's it has strong enough themes that you can like kind of work with it, but it's still it's very open-ended and kind of makes you think about it to get a satisfactory conclusion on how the game works. So I really like that part too. Otherwise, yeah, I had a great time. I'm not sure what I'm gonna play next for this side too. I do have plenty of more interactive fiction games I want to play. There's plenty more classics, landmarks in the genre that I want to experience, especially after how good of an experience this game was, but I feel like I want to pace them out. There are, like I said, I'm still having trouble with my computer, but there are some other games I've been wanting to play, so I might see if I can get some of them running. And if I can't, maybe we'll go to another IF game. If we can, we'll play that. So I'll look forward to however that plays out, I guess. I'm not sure yet, but otherwise, we will call it here. And for now, as always, thank you for watching.